His approach is a little bit different than ours and a little bit different than Data Tribe. And I kind of think it takes a lot of people with a lot of different approaches out there. Justin also has another foot clearly in the Valley. So he will make an effort to travel out west, understand what's going on in Silicon Valley, understand what kind of tech's out there. And there's a lot of differences between East Coast and West Coast cyber companies and software companies. So Justin's got a really clear view of both sides of the country here.
Let's expand on that, because that's too interesting of a point to leave on the table. What are some of those? You said there's a difference between sort of East Coast and West Coast cyber companies. What did you mean by that?
So, I don't want to be stereotypical and throw, everybody falls into these categories, right? But in general, what I see from an East Coast company is that the tech is overdeveloped before the fundraising happens. And from the West Coast companies, the concept is overdeveloped before the fundraising happens. So we'll really clearly see some companies, they'll pitch us on these amazing, again, I don't want to like swim lane anybody's products out there, but stuff that we've seen before, right? Intrusion detection, orchestration, authentication, amazingly built products on the East Coast with no real concept of go-to-market, who the competitors are, anything like that. On the other hand, I'll see West Coast companies come out with amazing ideas, really next-gen stuff and no code. And maybe a PowerPoint, maybe some stuff like that.
And funding in their pockets,
and
basically.
They're trying to do that right now. Of course, not every company fits in, but those are the trends.
So you can often raise with sort of a concept on the West Coast, whereas you typically don't see that here on the East Coast, where if you're just a concept and you don't have any sort of revenue or customer traction.
Well, I think if you're a savvy investor, you really want to see both, right? You want to see a great idea with some proof. And I've actually written about this with my, the 5-slide pitch deck, which we can talk about a little bit. But ultimately, I've seen a lot of these great companies, the hit rate on investing is still not high, right? You have a great idea. Maybe you talk to 25 companies, you get 2, maybe 3 term sheets. I don't know the last time I had a company that got more than 3 or 4 term sheets at once. And that's usually after running a process where you're pitching 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 people. Typically what happens is somebody's the first one to say, I'll do an investment, and then that'll come along. And that'll happen for East Coast companies. It'll happen for West Coast companies. But for those that struggle, all the stereotypes, like very often, like an East Coast company will say, oh, there's no funding here on the East Coast. We'll go to the West Coast. And they'll do 10, 15 meetings, and they might get one more investor. Well, they might have done 10 or 15 meetings here by going to St. Louis or up in Boston or something like that and get that. Same thing on the West Coast. I've seen a lot of people who, they do their fundraising, and there's usually something that's holding it back. Maybe it's valuation, maybe it's the competitiveness of what they're doing, maybe it's the long-term belief is not aligned with what the customers or what the venture capital wants. So it's very interesting.
But you also mentioned that on the East Coast, you've seen a trend where the product is further along developed than it would be per se on a West Coast side of the house. Is that something indicative of the Maryland, Virginia, East Coast, New York mentality? I mean, do we have to find perfection before we're brave enough to bring it to an investor? Is that what you're seeing?
I think there's a trend there. It's changing. It's not like I never see a Maryland or a Virginian startup that's at this early. Because of course you want to talk as early as possible. But a lot of times I'll see code demonstrating proof of concept on my first meeting, and I'll have a better sense of what the product does than what problem it solves. And that's a problem. That's definitely a problem.
In fairness, though, to this region, we're new at it, right? The East Coast is new at asking for investment as opposed to the Silicon Valley, the left side of the hemisphere.
In particular, our region too, DC, kind of.
Yeah, there's a couple forces driving that. Like, so Maryland, was the center of venture capital, right? You had NEA basically, born here in Maryland. You have Greenspring here now. These are old, huge funds that the problem is when you make a lot of money, it's kind of hard to focus on the small things because you only can put a little bit of money to work. So you have to do indirect investing. And then you're having that same problem out west. So constantly I will get calls from other funds. Hey, Ron, can we do can we do an introductory meeting? Can we share some deal flow? It'd be nice to work on some things together because it's so hard to get those
These are from
things
VCs,
VCs,
outreaching to
other
you,
funds. Yeah.